Welcome to Women Kicking Glass, the only radio show on OC Talk Radio dedicated to empowering women to be the best leaders they can be in any endeavor they choose. Patty Grimm is our host and interviews top women in a variety.
Imagine what it would feel like to lose everything. Your job, your home, your family, your dignity. This has happened to thousands of the men, women, veterans, and young adults we serve at Working Wardrobes.
Welcome to Women Kicking Glass, the only radio show on OC Talk Radio dedicated to empowering women to be the best leaders they can be in any endeavor they choose. Patty Grimm is our host and interviews top women in a variety of fields to help women grow, learn, and lean in together. Patty has over 25 years of experience in primarily male-dominated fields in senior-level management positions. Patty is the owner of Advantage Training Limited, an organizational leadership team training company. She recently released her new book for women called Quiet Women Never Changed History. Be strong, stand out, and stand up. With the subtitle, Let's Go Kick Some Glass.
Okay, we got some glass kicking, laughing ladies here this morning. It took us a long time to get the stream up. I apologize if you're listening live. We had to start it and stop it a couple of times because the stream kept crashing, but...
Yeah, so we're live now. So this is Patty Grimm, and this is going to be an incredible show. I can tell you we're probably going to hit on every hot topic out there. This is probably may not be completely politically correct, so I may need to warn people, but this is going to be an honest conversation with Leslie Dixon, who's founder of the Birds and Bees Connection, and she's taught hundreds of couples, parents, and kids a comprehensive program for children starting as young as, not even in kindergarten yet, 0 to 6 years old. And so really looking at how to educate our children and how to help children understand, talk about sex and their bodies. And we're going to talk about what's going on in the sexual environment in today's sexual misconduct. But she's passionate about creating safe and nurturing spaces where parents and children come together to connect and communicate honestly. She teaches courses to empower parents, students, teachers, through focused time together and fostering deep, healthy relationships and reduce the chance that children will get into high-risk behaviors. And so we've had a couple conversations at NABO, right, in the National Association of Women Business Owners, and I was just surprised to hear that a lot of parents are afraid to have this conversation. But let's start with you, and how did you get into this area? The birds and the bees.
The birds and the bees. Thank you, Patty. My background is as a school nurse. And so I was the one who used to go into those classrooms and teach the birds and bees and the human growth and development classes and the puberty classes. And what I found was that those young kids were so curious. They asked some of the most amazing questions. And then I sent them home to talk to their parents. And guess what didn't happen?
The parents didn't talk to them.
Nobody was talking. So I thought, well, who better to talk to their children about this topic than their parents? So let's have classes they take together.
And I think you had a statistic that only a certain very small percentage of parents are actually having the birds and bees conversation with their children. And if they are, they might be having that conversation too late.
Right. And when we talk about the birds and bees, I am talking about everything from nuts to bolts, everything, puberty, their body changing. So there's a Harris poll. It says 90% of parents want to be their child's primary educator. Only 4% actually do.
4%.
4%. And those are the ones that we see, and the rest of them we don't see. And that's what makes me really sad, because people need to be talking about these topics.
Well, and that's the great thing about what you do, because you educate parents and together with their children.
Correct.
You also help educate schools and educators and other school nurses to have the kind of honest conversations that you're having.
Correct. And it's really important, because I think, and we talked about this just a little while ago, is that we have this sort of puritanical idea and feelings and, behavior around the topic of sex.
We have guilt.
We have guilt. We have shame. We have old histories that keep coming back. And yet, in this society, we are very sexualized. In fact, the statistic is our young people are one of the most sexualized, young people that there are. So it's out there. It's permeating. but we're afraid to say those words like vagina and penis. And we give
I told you. Paul's out of here. Studio manager Paul's out of the room.
I didn't bring my illustrations with me because you couldn't see them anyway. But yes, we talk about these topics, and I think this is one of the reasons that it's a challenge for parents to sign up for these classes because of the topics and their own history around this topic.
Right, and there's actually a really kind of interesting commercial right now that's a doctor that's saying we need to talk about these things like vagina.
Correct.
And we need to be able to openly talk about those things. So what are positive things that parents are doing today?
Correct. Well, I think the great thing about social media versus when I was raising children, I think I had one book that sort of helped me how to raise children. I was sort of winging it, and thank God I was a nurse. But nowadays, with social media, you can go to mommy bloggers, and that becomes your community. And if you have questions, I think that's where you go to when you have questions, concerns, and there's a support system out there to help parents now, which I didn't have when I was raising my children, those many years ago.
Yeah, and I guess, I hadn't thought about it before, but that community out there, if you have a question or an issue, you can post something on a blog and you get responses back
Correct.
from people. Now, you're getting advice from a non-professional.
Correct.
But you're getting advice for somebody that maybe's already been there, done that. Maybe they've had the conversation
Correct. And
with their children.
I think something you said is also very important. They are getting it oftentimes from a non-professional. And what I'm trying to also teach young parents is listen to your intuitive. Don't just listen to all those things that people are saying, but also listen to your intuitive as well, because that is also going to help you raise healthy children. So that's an important piece, along with, yes, there's all kinds of information out there for parents.
Now, you talked about before when we've chatted, both at NAWBO and in our conversations, you've chatted about you have workshops starting as young as children. I think it's 0 to 6th grade, and then you've got it broken down by different areas.
Sure.
So how do you start to have those early conversations with children that maybe are under 10 or 12 years old?
Well, the younger one from 0, it's a little difficult to bring your 0 in, you know, your newborn baby, and have a conversation with them.
Right.
But I do have a presentation I do with parents 0 to 6. And that's amazing. These parents come in and they are so curious and they want to know what to do and how to do it. And so it's really a conversation about talking about proper terminology with your body. One of my most important conversations they have is about nudity and about showering and when to start, when to, stop. So we have some really amazing conversations, and it gives those mommies and some daddies the opportunity from an expert to ask questions and feel more empowered.
Right, and so as they get into maybe middle school, high school, how does that conversation start? And you have to realize, and I think everybody knows this, that kids as young as second, third, and fourth grade are seeing these things on TV.
Sure.
They're seeing them on social media. They're seeing the magazines, the things that are going on. And so, having those conversations early is very important. But as they start to get into junior high and high school, when they're starting to experience these things, how does that conversation then change, or what's the conversation you have with parents and kids?
Well, the challenge is that if a parent, by the time their child is in middle school or high school, is going to decide to have a conversation with their child, more than likely it's not going to go real well. And one of the reasons, we start as young as we do is because I want parents and children to start to get comfortable with this topic. And the topic isn't just about sex. It's about social media. It's about self-esteem, especially self-esteem.
Right.
Because what we're finding is, first of all, young girls are starting puberty at a much younger age.
Like I'm hearing as young as 10 and 11 years old.
8 years old.
8 years old?
Correct.
They're starting their menstrual periods?
No, see, that's the confusion. Puberty is different from getting your period.
Okay.
It happens about 2 years before. So we're seeing girls as young as 8 starting that first stage. And the 3 reasons that we're seeing it is 1, obesity, 2, environment, and 3, stress. And that's a really big one.
Yeah.
Is that they're being stressed. So if parents aren't talking to their children, especially girls, at an early stage, by the time they reach junior high and they're starting their period and they're already in puberty, it's almost too late. And then those young people already are feeling left out, and self-esteem really gets challenged at that point.
Yeah, I could imagine that, and maybe they think their self-esteem is if I'll be more popular if I do some things that, and I heard something recently that a lot of young people don't consider oral sex to be real sex.
Well, the statistic for vaginal intercourse is more in high school. The statistic for oral sex, and I know parents are just going, oh my God. Don't say that word, because they're looking at it as an adult. But when we think about what children are doing, especially with what they're seeing and what they're hearing through social media, and they are engaging in oral sex in the middle school. It's more statistically in the middle school. And no, they don't look at it as sex. They look at it as, kissing, and then it's why they're doing it. Well, one of the reasons they're doing it is girls are doing it to get attention. Girls are doing it because then boys will like them.
Right.
And boys are doing it because they're just going along with it.
Right.
And so, yes, it's a challenge, and no one's talking about, one, the physical risks like STDs. Yes, you can get STDs from oral sex. And two, the emotional problems that come along with engaging in those kind of behaviors at such a young age without any conversation from anyone helping them with this topic.
So I know you were a school nurse and you've got these wonderful programs that you teach, which is great, and we'll talk about how people can get in touch with you before we go on the break and at the end of the show as well. Are schools doing anything to help educate these kids on their bodies and oral sex, or just overall? What are schools doing to help?
Well, here's the challenge. They are doing certain things, and then some of them aren't doing certain things. Governor Brown signed a bill, comprehensive sex education bill, about 2 years ago.
Right.
And the schools are trying to implement it. The challenge is they're bumping up against a couple of issues. One, academics. So who's going to come first? Are we going to talk about puberty, sex education, or are we going to talk about academics? So we know what's going to mostly win. And second of all, because it's such a challenging topic, oftentimes school districts don't want to have to deal with the parents, the challenges that go along with that. But I know the school districts are doing their best. Now, the biggest challenge, they're not starting early enough.
Yeah.
Many of the courses don't start until 7th or 8th grade,
right.
And the issues are starting younger and younger. When we're talking about 4th graders who already have information and are already being challenged with their self-esteem, so it has to start younger.
Yeah, and I guess you can't just rely on the school. I mean, it's like homework or anything else. As a parent, you can't rely on the school just to be the one that handles these conversations. You need to have that open, honest communication with your kids.
Exactly. Well, and I always believe it takes a village to raise a child.
Oh.
And it even has to do with this. So you said parents need to have open, honest conversation. And unfortunately, let's go back to that statistic, about 4% actually are. Well, why are they doing it? Well, they're afraid they're going to say the wrong thing. They don't know what to say. They're hoping their child will come to them. They're hoping they'll get it at school. They're hoping that it'll come from someplace else, and most of them are afraid that their children are going to come to them and say, well, where do babies come from? And they'll go screaming into the hills at that point because they're afraid of these topics.
Yeah. So what are some techniques that parents can use? Just a couple techniques maybe you teach in your classes.
Well, first of all, I think they need to be educated. And I think they need to know, what is proper terminology and have that first conversation. And I think parents need to be willing to start the conversation, not be afraid of that, not be waiting for their children to come to them. And it's something you said, I think, is that find out what they're looking for.
What they already know.
They know what they're looking for. Be willing to have conversations. Take the electronic device away, find a quiet place, and be curious. Start the conversation. And if they ask you a question that you don't know the answer, don't be afraid of saying, you know what? Either let's find the answer together, or I will help you. I'll get the answer. We're going to have a conversation. please make sure you come back again. And then continue the conversation, but don't be afraid to be human.
And it's not a one-time conversation. But I like the idea that if they ask you something you don't know, to say, let's go find out together.
Correct.
Let's go figure this out.
And it's an ongoing conversation. There is no talk. It is ongoing conversations. Find teachable moments. There are tons of teachable moments out there. And find them and be willing to have those conversations. Now, this needs to start young. And young conversations, even when you have a toddler, about proper terminology about their body, boundaries, safe and private touch and public, and all those conversations that young children need. And we're talking about, these conversations about sexual harassment. Well, these conversations need to be taught as early as toddlers, young children, because they already, at young age, have preconceived ideas about how they should behave with other people. And I think it's really important to have these conversations earlier than later.
Well, and it's interesting because you said earlier, we look at how we were raised. Like I look at how my parents taught me. They really didn't teach me very much.
Correct.
Right? We did go through those classes in school, and I swear to God that the movies they showed were from World War II. And it was all about danger of venereal disease or sexual transmitted diseases, whatever you want to call it. And it was all this negative shame and guilt versus embracing your body and what you have. And maybe the little kid says, well, how come, he has that little penis thing. Sorry, we're going to say all these other words. And I don't have one, right?
And we're talking about normal development. I think, parents, well, there's a couple of things. I think you're right, is that many parents that I see, I would say almost 85%, say they got nothing or very little when they were children. And that the whole puberty experience was in some ways traumatic.
Shameful.
Absolutely shameful.
Guilt. In the ancient days, when a woman had her period, she was not allowed to be part of the tribe because she was considered to be contagious or diseased. So there's all this shame that goes back to this religious Puritan, way back in history of our times, about being ashamed of it versus, like you said, embracing your body.
Right, and I think we still have that problem. So oftentimes parents, and I think this is one of the challenges about talking about it, are still in that shame base. They're still uncomfortable. And the thought of being in a group and talking about this could be very overwhelming. But on the other hand, if we're able to face it, if we're able to sit in groups and have a sisterhood for women and start to talk about it, I think we can get beyond it and especially help their daughters who that if we don't, change the cycle will continue.
That is a really, really important message. We're going to go to break. Before we go to break, I do want to get some information from you so make sure the audience knows how to get in touch with you. But it's really important to say that we have to break that cycle because it's going to continue. And kids are exposed to this stuff in the media. And if parents aren't teaching them, they're going to learn it someplace else. And what they learn may not be the message you want them to understand. So, Leslie, how do people get in touch with you? How could they, contact you to set up a workshop, anything like that? Your website, and please spell your name.
My name is Leslie Dixon, and it's Leslie Dixon, Dixon. And our website is www.birds, BIRDS, N as in Nancy, bees, BEES, connection.com. Correct.
Awesome.
Phone number is 949-215-7809. And you can email us at info@birdsnbeesconnection.com.
Yeah. So birds and then the letter N. Bees.com.
Correct. I know it's a little, long.
No, but they can probably just even go in their browser and put it in birdsandbees.com and it's going to come up.
It's going to, yes, we've made sure that it bounces up pretty quickly.
Yeah, well, great. We're going to come back and we're going to continue this conversation about the birds and the bees, but we're also going to talk about messages parents are giving their boys and girls, and we're going to talk about the whole sexual harassment and what's going on. So this is a great show. Hang in there and let's keep talking.
When you use the Premier Rewards Gold Card from American Express, the rewards points can keep on multiplying. Buy 3 with triple points on airfare. Buy 2 with double points on gas and groceries. And a single point for pretty much every other dollar you spend on the card. Then, start choosing from over 1 million rewards to redeem all those points. Apply today and the annual fee for the first year is on us. Call 1-800-AXP-GOLD or visit axpgold.com. The annual fee for the card is $175. See terms, conditions, and restrictions at axpgold.com.
When it comes to pioneers in their respective industries, we all know the Apples, Starbucks, and Trader Joe's of the world. In the realm of recruiting, Decision Toolbox is the industry's best-kept secret. With 90% of their business from referrals and repeat customers. For over 20 years, Decision Toolbox's U.S.-based team of recruiters, sourcers, professional writers, quality personnel, and tech support has perfected a Six Sigma approach to talent management. No matter the size of the project, Decision Toolbox delivers incredible results. A cost per hire less than half of what contingency firms charge, with the winning candidate presented in an average of 14 days, all with a 12-month candidate warranty. With results like that, Decision Toolbox won't be a secret for long. Visit us at www.dtoolbox.com for more information.
All right. We're talking about the birds and the bees here with Patty and her guest. I can't believe, I just have to say as a father of she's now 25, when this moment came, it was very uncomfortable for me to have this conversation. But the motivating factor was better me than somebody else.
Yeah, and I think the clear message there is if you're not having this conversation with your son and daughter.
Correct.
They're going to get that information off social media. And is that really the way you want them to think? Do you want your children to look at the Kardashians, sorry to mention that name, as the norm? Or do you want to have them send them the correct message?
And there's a statistic that goes with that, and this is one of my most concerning statistics. The average age for boys to access pornography is 10.
10.
10.
10.
And so, yes, that if you're not talking about it and they go on social media, that it's pretty easy for them to access pornography. And I'm going to tell a short story.
Please.
There was a school that, that had contacted me, and she was telling me that there was a bunch of fourth grade girls who got together for a sleepover, and they accessed social media, and what did they access? Oral sex. And so here were a bunch of fourth grade girls.
So fourth grade's like maybe 10, 11?
9, 10, sure, who access, about oral sex. And can you ever erase that? No, you can't. It's always there. And again, how prepared were the parents to talk to their children about this topic? Luckily, I got to talk to them about the topic. But it is what you were right. These young people are getting it younger, more intense than, generations before.
And then it repeats that cycle of shame and guilt.
That's right.
And do you want your young daughter, whatever her age happens to be, to have the person who educates her on sex to be an older boy? Maybe she's 12 and he's 14. Is that how you want them to learn about their bodies and about sex? I mean, I think that's so critical.
Well, one of the things I say is that, when I teach my programs, it's a lot about being comfortable with their bodies.
Right.
And learning all there is to know about their bodies. And I'll say to my, middle school and high school girls, I want you to be really comfortable with your body. I mean, in all aspects. I won't use the M word, but in all aspects, before you're going to allow anyone to touch you and have sex with you.
Right.
And it is part of being, having a communication and feeling comfortable and, not doing it for the wrong reasons.
Yeah.
And waiting as long as possible, because another statistic is out there, is that 10 million young people contract sexually transmitted diseases every year. And that is a number that it's just so discomforting for me. And education and prevention would stop that.
Yeah. Yeah. So it looks like we have something coming in.
I got one question here. What about all this stuff that didn't exist before with social media, sexting? sending sex pictures or sex messages.
Correct.
And not only the prevalence of that at young age, but the permanency of it. Your picture's up there forever.
Forever. And it's so hard on young people's self-esteem when those situations happen. And again, we have very immature brains. They're not thinking like an adult. They think this is a lot of fun, and they post something because they think it's fun, and everyone is doing it. The Kardashians are doing it.
Right.
So they don't think about it, and they do it, and the fallout is devastating. We see suicides. We see all kinds of problems that come. And it's not just girls. It's boys as well.
Right.
So, yes, you're absolutely right. With social media has come things that are devastating, and it can be lasting for the rest of their lives.
And there was a case, and it may not be as prevalent today, but there was a case recently where a young boy took a picture of his girlfriend naked.
Right.
And posted it, and then he was prosecuted
That's right.
and was labeled as a sex offender for life.
For life.
Because he took a naked picture of his teenage girlfriend and posted it, that got then posted and posted and posted.
Correct.
In the old days, if something happened, you might tell 5 or 10 people.
Right.
Nowadays, something happens, it gets posted out to millions and keeps getting reposted. It goes viral, as they say. And that young boy was prosecuted as a sex offender for the rest of his life.
And she was branded as someone who had her body out there.
Right.
And what did it do to her self-esteem? Right. And again, oftentimes after that happens, if there isn't that conversation with the parents, where do these young people go to be able to deal with the fallout with something as devastating as that?
Right. So what can parents do? I mean, what are the ways and messages that we can be sending to our girls and boys to help them really overcome some of this a terrible environment? I can't even think of the word right now. I'm kind of struggling with the word, which is unusual. What messages could we be sending to our girls and our boys that would help them maybe overcome some of this?
Well, one of the things I said is we need to start early. I
Yep.
mean, that. I say this over and over again, and we need to talk with them.
Right.
And I think that's important. I think parents need to get over this, fear and their own issues around this topic. But they need to have open conversations with their children. And they need to talk about consequences, and they need to talk about boundaries, and they need to talk about not doing certain things. And the more they have these conversations, open conversations. And here's another piece that's really important.
Right.
This isn't about being judgmental, critical. It's about being open and willing to listen to their children. Because what we want in the long run is we want those young people to feel like they can come to their parents and ask them questions, talk about concerns. Most of the young people who get bullied, cyberbullied, they do not go to their parents afterwards. So I think this is the most important thing. Start young. Right. Be open, being willing to listen to their children as they talk about their own concerns and fears. Another piece with girls, this is a huge piece, is what we're finding is young girls aren't getting their basic needs met. They're not feeling secure. They're feeling stressed. They're feeling all kinds of things which are really challenging their self-esteem. When a tween or a teen girl feels challenged in that area, more than likely she might act out to get her needs met.
And because girls are still being raised to be perfectionists, I've had this conversation on this show before, they want to be perfect. So they're thinking, right. I'm not tall enough, I'm not thin enough, I'm not pretty enough, my hair's not the right color, I'm not. That perfectionism in little girls doesn't go away when you become an adult.
No.
In fact, some of the statistics about why women don't go for the big jobs out there is because they don't think they're good enough. They don't think they're ready. And that comes back to how they were, as young girls, how they were doing things. So.
That's absolutely true. And oftentimes, you just said it, if the adult mother, if that mother is feeling these things, she is going to model that for her daughter. And that's what the girls are going to pick up, that they're already not good enough.
Yeah.
And they don't look good enough, they don't act good enough. And so they're going to act out to get that attention that they're not getting. Now, we need to talk about boys as well.
Yeah, I want to talk about boys.
I think we talk a lot about girls, and it's important. Girls have their own issue. They're sensitive. Their self-esteem is really important. But I think parents, especially dads, if at all possible, need to talk to their boys as well. And starting young is, that preconceived idea. They already have those preconceived ideas about girls.
Exactly.
And they need to talk about boundaries, and they need to talk about what's appropriate, whether it be language or whether it be touch. Or even what they say and what's appropriate. And I think those conversations between fathers and sons, or at least a male role model,
right,
is really important, because a lot of it comes from moms.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the boys really need good male role models, because I think they are also very concerned.
Yeah, because the boys look at their dad, and they look at, or a male. If the dad's not present, they look
Correct.
at a brother or a uncle or somebody. They look at that dad for what's appropriate behavior. And it's interesting because my husband was a high school football coach up in Seattle for many years, and he taught the kids from the time they were little league football. So we're talking 7 years old, about decisions, accountability, and consequences.
Right.
That anytime you make a decision, there are going to be consequences,
Right.
and you're accountable for those consequences,
Right.
good or bad.
Right.
And I can't tell you the number of times we had parents come to us, my husband and I. He was the football coach and I was the team mom, asking us for help with schoolwork or talking to their kids about certain things or inappropriate behavior. And we were more than willing to talk, but we're like, you need to have this conversation too.
Right.
You need to talk about that every decision you make has consequences, and you're accountable for what happens to
Right.
you.
And this needs to start early. I mean, when I have these conversations with these young mommies, we talk about this, is that
Yeah.
it's important to start these conversations so we create these strong, resilient young people who
Right.
also understand about healthy boundaries.
Yeah, and it's interesting because you said if the mom isn't modeling things, the girl's going to have the same kind of thoughts or behavior. So if the
Correct.
mom's constantly dieting and criticizing themselves for certain things, the daughter's going to do the same things. And I tell people you can't give away what you do not own. I mean, if you don't have strong self-esteem, you can't give that to your daughter, to your sons, and pass that on to them.
And you said sons, because the same thing is
Yeah.
that how mothers model being a woman and being a mom
Right.
is also what the boys are picking up. Children are like sponges. They pick up everything.
Yep.
And that's what they internalize, and that's the language, the verbiage, and they're also being parented in many ways or influenced by social media. It is having such a strong influence on how children think about themselves, process,
Right.
everything.
Yeah. Well, what's interesting is that there's so much. I mean, social media is everywhere, and you almost can't escape it. I know a lot of people try and control social media. So things like what's going on in the news right now with sexual harassment,
Correct.
sexual misconduct, the way people are being treated. Kids are either seeing that on the news or they're on the TV or their friends are talking about it. And I always say, first off, start off by asking a question.
Right.
So even in the sex conversations or these, conversations with your children, start off with a question. Well, what do you know?
Correct.
What have you seen? What have you heard? Because then maybe you know where to guide the conversation. So how would you talk to young boys about what's going on in the news today that they might be seeing around the whole sexual harassment, sexual misconduct? And then let's talk about what we might say to young girls.
Well, I think I think what you said is very important. I think they're hearing all kinds of things right now. So I think it would be important for parents to become, investigators. What are you hearing? What do you think?
How does this make you feel?
How does this make you feel? And you may be surprised either way how they come back. And I think this is a perfect opportunity to talk about how you behave with, if it's a boy, with girls, girls, how to behave with boys, either way. And I think, if there's parents to sit down and both genders have these conversations with their children, and also listen to them, being willing to listen, because I also imagine they're very confused by all of this.
Right.
And this is a perfect opportunity for them to start talking about what's appropriate. And
Yeah, I think it's almost a perfect opportunity to say, what are you hearing? What are you seeing? What's that make you think? What's that make you feel? And than to start having that conversation about what's appropriate and not appropriate.
Correct, because what I'm hearing right now is a lot of conversation around this, a lot of anger from everyone. And what I would like to hear is more about solutions, prevention, how we can move forward with the generations that are out there now,
Right.
so we don't have to have these conversations. Because if we don't, the cycle will continue. And we will just have anger and frustration and no solutions. This is a perfect opportunity to have these conversations with your children.
Right.
Set the stage for healthy behavior, boundaries, and open the conversation to be able to have ongoing conversation with
Right.
your children. This is the perfect opportunity.
Yeah, and the idea of having the conversation, first asking them what they know, and then relating it to something they can relate to at their
Correct.
age level. I did a webinar a couple weeks ago on sexual misconduct and the exclusion that's going on in the world, because it's not just about men versus women, it's also about people that are different. It might be different
Correct.
race, religion, sexual orientation. There's just all this anger built up in the world right now of them versus us.
Correct.
And having the conversation, and then related to something they know. Like in any time you go into any school, starting as young as kindergarten and elementary school, there's always rules of conduct, for lack of
Correct.
a better term. Like we don't hit, we don't call people names, related to something they know, and say there's things that are appropriate and there are things that are inappropriate, just like you have your rules. Now, what happens at school when somebody hits somebody?
Well, unfortunately, we've been dealing with that in situations at the school that my grandson goes to.
Right.
And yes, on some level, this is part of their sixth graders. They're 6 years old. I'm sorry, they're first graders. And what we're seeing already is how young people behave when they're frustrated, when they're angry, and they don't have the language be able to deal with it. Luckily, his school has been handling it just amazingly, but I think it is not uncommon that we're talking about first graders, kindergartners, who are already showing their frustrations and anger. And here's another thing. Little girls are already provocative. And I know that sounds awful, but, on some level, little girls already have that, provocative situation. It doesn't mean that they need to act out or that anyone needs to treat them accordingly as
Right.
far as that's concerned.
Right.
But I think parents need to have these conversations, again, about what's appropriate and boundaries and how to really instill information that's going to strengthen their self-esteem, not lessen it.
That's a really important point. How do we help young boys and young girls find ways to strengthen their own self-esteem
Correct.
and not lower it, but how do they also help each other? Like, when we were young growing up, and I think something just came in on Twitter or a comment came in, but when we were growing up, if you selected a prom dress, or a homecoming dress, you would put, nobody saw it until you got to the dance, maybe, or maybe your
Correct.
friend that saw it. Nowadays, when they're trying things on, they're posting them, and people are being criticized
Correct.
for being, oh, you look fat, or you whatever it happens to be. So it's just, it's a cruel world out there. I mean, I'm a parent, I've got grandkids, and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, what a hard time to raise kids.
It's a challenging time, and that's why we come back to that fact that parents need to become empowered. They need to have the language, and they need to sit down and have conversations with their children.
Right.
And they can take classes that are out there,
Like yours.
like mine.
Paul, we had something come in.
Here's one I can relate to. I completely agree with this. And how do we deal with parents who are trying to sexualize their daughters too young? And I'm thinking of, I remember my own daughter, we went to a middle school dance, and I thought I was at the hooker's ball. I mean, my God, the way and I thought, did your mother see you before you went out there? And in many cases, the mothers are dressing them up to look like this.
Yeah.
Oh, don't you look sexy? Don't you look cute? No, you look like you just came out of off the street or something.
Off the streets of Las Vegas.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
I mean, it isn't just the kids who are seeing this, and in many cases, the parents are pushing them to be
Right.
sexualized at an earlier age.
Right. Well, I think that's another thing that parents need to look at their own sexual issues. I think we are talking about that when they didn't get the information they needed when they were younger, that, they're still dealing with their own issues, and especially when they're looking at social media, because they're seeing, you know, what is out there, and they want to model it as well. And I've got news for you. Most people don't want to age. And so they want to stay as young as possible. Yeah. And so, yes, they sort of project onto their own children what they, you know, maybe what they missed and how they can dress their daughters up. And I think you're right. I think they need to take a really good look at that. But I have to say that there's a local high school near us, and I've been really impressed with the way the girls have been dressing. They haven't been too provocative. They've been sort of grungy looking, and that's, I'd rather almost see the grungy look.
I'd rather see the baggy sweatpants.
Yeah, I'd rather, you know, to its, you know, little, you know, asexual than that provocative, or we can sort of find a midway point to this. But it comes down to looking at our own issues, seeing how we can create healthy sexual young people that don't have to engage in any kind of risky behavior. Because we've been talking about sexuality. Well, let's talk, you know, we have to bring up the drug situation as well. It's out there as well, and that's because young people are really challenged with how they feel about themselves.
Yeah, and we as parents and grandparents, or even if you're not a parent or grandparent, you probably have a niece or a nephew or somebody in your life, a young person, that it's up to us to help make sure we're giving them the positive messages that we can, and
Correct.
We're having those honest conversations. And a lot of times it starts with a question.
Right. And it also starts with looking at ourselves, taking a good look at ourselves and what what we say and what our messages are and what our words are. But it's also taking the risk to talk with your children. And I know we've repeated this probably 100 million times.
It's okay. You got to say it 10, 20 times for people to really get it.
And I really want parents to get this. They have to be brave and they have to be willing. You know, we do coaching. We do online classes. If you don't want to take a class, then take one, you know, take one of our online classes. But please do something.
Right.
Can I just share one quick story you make me think of? When my daughter was, I don't know, 14, 15, something like that. We tried to create an open conversation where you can tell us anything. We won't be shocked. We won't scream. We'd rather know than not know, right? As much as we might not like it, we'd rather know.
Right.
And so we hammered this message in over and over again. And my daughter was acting a little weird one week. And we thought, oh, something's going on here. And we knew she liked a boy and a boy liked her at school. And we still have the note at home. And she finally broke down, and she couldn't tell us, but she wrote to my wife. She wrote a little note and said, I'm so sorry, I should have told you, but he kissed me last night. And I thought, hallelujah, she spoke. At least she told us something that's going on.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
And that's what we want.
Yeah.
We really do want it, but that conversation, that opening that conversation needs to start early. And then on the other hand, it's never too late. You were talking about 15 years old. So if you give them that opportunity and you say that, it's really important. Now, on the other hand, if they come to you, you have to be willing to listen to them.
That's right. You can't suddenly start saying, well, you'd let him kiss you. What did you do? Then they'll never come back again.
They'll never come back again.
That's right. The other thing is if you ever lie to them, they're going to know it.
Oh, yeah.
And so you have to be willing to be open and honest.
Well, I remember having a conversation with my son, and he, you know, I grew up in Rialto, California, and I was, high school, pom-pom, whatever, all the kind of stuff. And, we used to, before football games, we would go to Del Taco and get a Coke, and we'd put rum in it, and then we'd go cheer a game. And my son, we were coming down the hill one time in Washington to the house, and he goes, how come when you were young, it was okay for kids to go hang out, maybe have a beer or something, and it's so, bad today? And the only thing I could say was, back then, if something happened, they took you home to your parents, right? And they very seldom called the police. They take you home to your parents because that was worse than calling the police. I said, what's different today is there's so much focus in media, and we're so plugged in that it's everywhere. There probably always was drunk driving accidents. There was always situations that were happening. It just wasn't in your face 24/7. So is there a downside to being so plugged in with our children and being so plugged in with the world?
Well, it's interesting because I read a statistic recently that says that young people are safer now than they've ever been in 30 years.
But yet we have helicopter parents.
Absolutely. It is the most amazing thing is that maybe on some level we we were too open or whatever the situation, this group of parents feel that they need to protect their children, and yet these young people are the safest they've ever been. And so, again, I invite parents to look at that statistic and see how they can be more open and give them a little bit more freedom and let them, play more and be children longer. And let them play outside.
Let them get dirty.
Let them get dirty.
Let your girls fall down and get dirty.
Absolutely.
And when our son fell down or something happened on his bike, we'd laugh.
Right.
And then we saw blood, then we realized it was serious. Do the same thing with your girls and
Sure.
boys. Allow them to live. Allow them outside
Sure.
the house.
But we live in a world. When I let my daughter at 12 or whatever she was, 12, I think, start walking a block down the street to go to school or something, my friend said, "You're inviting danger. You're inviting disaster. She can't walk a block to school on a big public street with a security guard." They don't have buses anymore. Every parent lines up to pick up their kids and take them, and many times they literally won't. There's somebody they're handing the child to you to make sure that there's been a transition. Nobody has a bicycle anymore because we're afraid that they'll ride away and we won't 2 blocks away and we won't see what's happening.
But you just said we're safer than we've ever
been before. And the whole issue of not letting them fail.
Yeah.
We're so afraid of that, So I think we need to all take a look at some of the issues that are out there to really help our children to be more resilient, stronger.
Yeah.
Last question, where do we get in touch with you?
Yeah, one last thing,
okay.
one quick last thing. So your last words of advice for parents and children out there, kind of what if they're going to really kick glass with their kids or they're going to help them become empowered in themselves, what would be your last couple of words of advice?
Become informed. Put down, unplug. Unplug. I think that's the first thing I would say.
If I had my phone in front of me, I'd hold my phone up, but it's not here.
Is that find time to have quality time to be with your children. I think if that were the most important thing is that, if we would unplug even a little bit and just be with them, literally be with them and listen to them and have fun with them. And I think that would be the most important thing. And then second of all, get brave and talk with your children. Find classes, find books, find ways to open up conversations and be willing to listen and be present for your child and help children to really feel like they mean something. I think that's one of the most important things that I really see that parents can do right now to support their children.
And you may not just start small of just no cell phones, no social media at the dinner table and have a conversation. So you can start small and start to unplug and start to become present and human again and not just something you talk through a device. So
fake it until you make it.
And be brave and understand it's going to be uncomfortable. So just do it.
Just do it. Get over yourself and just do it.
Perfect. So how do we get in touch with you? Because you mentioned you have online classes. So how do we find those online classes and how can we find you? It's been a great show. So just last couple of things. How do we find you?
The best way to find us is on our website, www.birds, BIRDS, N as in Nancy, bees, BEES, connection.com, and that will explain everything you need to know. There's a phone number that you can get us and an email that you can contact us.
Awesome.
And there are classes that you come to, online classes, and I do all kinds of coaching.
And please, 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 parents, have the conversation.
Absolutely.
The talk.
The talk. Ongoing talk.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. Great show.
Thank you, Patty.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Women Kicking Glass, the only radio show on OC Talk Radio dedicated to empowering women to be the best they can be. Listen each week or download the podcast at patty.grimm.podbean.com. To reach out to Patty to schedule a speech webinar or to learn more about her leadership and team training, contact Patty at pattygrimm@live.com. For more information about her company and her books. Have a kicking day.
Imagine what it would feel like to lose everything: your job, your home, your family, your dignity. This has happened to thousands of the men, women, veterans, and young adults we serve at Working Wardrobes.